So thank you guys for having me. This is Santa Barbara I kind of consider home in a lot of ways, and I was pretty blessed to come back and study that for my dissertation, even if it was from Santa Cruz. So as I was pulling this together, I was actually able to go back into the archives and dig up some of that work because I think it's really relevant for what's going on. So I'm going to talk about coastal processes. It may seem like a boring science lecture. There'll be lots of stuff in there. I'm going to go pretty quick. There's no quiz, no midterms, no finals, no final report. Please ask questions as you go. I'm going to go over a lot of this stuff pretty quick, and we can, I can try and clarify some things. History of the Santa Barbara waterfront, looking at the shoreline protection along the city, then getting into sea level rise, talking about some modeling, some projections, some of the results from some of the work we've done recently, and then talk a little bit about the local coastal program updates and sort of the process in the California Coastal Commission sea level rise guidance policy, and then talk a little bit about adaptation at a very high level. I think that's kind of down the road here, but coming soon, I hope. So I want to just sort of put this time-space continuum up here. Coastal processes function from whitewater turbulence all the way to climate change and sea level rise. It's going to take tens of thousands of years to equilibrate. There's a lot of things that happen in very small time scales, beach cusps and rip embayments. Those rip current embayments often cause erosion hotspots, tides. There's also scales of alterations. Sandcastle building I've seen lead to the development of rip currents, which cause erosion on the coast. Those meddling kids. Andrea would love to see more kids digging tunnels through the sand to drain out some sloughs on occasion. And then we do see the kind of human-induced climate change impacts that, with sea level rise that we're going to be contending with for the next several thousand years. And that's if we would have stopped greenhouse gas emissions 10 years ago. But there's a lot of alterations that affect the coast, also in the watersheds. And I coined a word called a sand shed, which is really that watershed which contributes the sand to the coast, and then that river of sand moving along the beaches and offshore. And every place that the sediment is stopped, or we reduce the amount of water velocity that can move sand, we are starving our beaches of sand. So when there's less sand on the beach, which provides the natural defenses for cliff erosion and things, we start to see acceleration of cliff erosion. It's a big system, and we need to think about the whole thing. Coasts are kind of endangered. You'll hear coastal squeeze often, where we have rising sea level, exponential population growth. Everybody wants to come to Santa Barbara on vacation, and you get increasing coastal development that then becomes inside that natural coastal erosion, coastal flooding process, so it becomes a hazard. And so we do things, armoring or other strategies to try and reduce the hazards by stopping and altering the processes. This could mean a lot of loss of visitor-generated income, recreational opportunities, habitats. There's a lack of information on some of these processes to actually inform planning at all. Okay, lecture time. Coastal processes, tides, waves, and currents in 10 minutes or less. Tides, okay? So it's really that rise and fall of the sea levels caused by the gravitational attraction between the moon and the sun, largely. There's about 42 tidal constituents caused by different tilts and angles, but it's pretty much the tide and the moon is the take-home, okay? In Santa Barbara, we have what's called a mixed semi-diurnal tide series. That means that there's 2 highs and 2 lows in a 24 and 52-minute tidal day. And that means that the tide ranges between the highs and lows are different. And it's also sort of the most common type of tide sequence we see around the world. So there are spring and neap tides. So in this figure here, you can see the sun and the moon, whether it's new moon or full moon, are in alignment. That gives us the largest gravitational pull on this bulge of water here, causing those spring tides, or the highest tide ranges. Neap tides, so that's called a spring tide series. And it's a little confusing because it happens in the spring and summer and fall and winter. It happens all the time. So basically every 2 weeks, we're in a spring tide series and a neap tide series between, and that's when the sun and the moon are sort of perpendicular, okay, at an angle of 90 degrees. King tides are typically the highest tides of the year. We've heard a lot about that in the news. I highly encourage a good community monitoring, citizen activist kind of thing is to monitor some of those places that are susceptible to low lying and to flooding. It'd be fascinating to see a water well down at the Castillo underpass, because that's always wet, and see how that fluctuates with the tides. But this is really caused by perihelion and perigee, which are basically the closest the Earth gets in its orbit around the sun and the moon. So as that gets closer, the moon and the sun are closest, the gravitational attraction on the water is the highest, and so we get the king tide series. That happens 2-3 times a year, typically in the fall and winter. And then we have tidal residuals. And a tidal residual is basically, we have predicted tide series, lots of crazy math on 42 constituents to give us a predicted tide series. And then we have observations from the tide station in Santa Barbara, or the San Francisco gauge has 150 years almost of tide records. And so we get this difference between predicted and observed. And that difference can be caused by El Ninos. We tend to see a 6-inch to a foot higher than predicted tides. It can be caused by small-scale oceanographic eddies. It can be caused by winds piling up. Southeast frontal winds come in and push water into the harbor and elevate the water above predicted. This is an example from the tsunami that happened in 2013 in Monterey. But you can see that, you know, the green shows the disturbance in the tides, and you can see that there's a big difference. El Ninos are particularly problematic because we tend to get a prolonged period of water levels above predicted, which allow all the waves and everything to get that much closer to shore before they break. That's all I had to say about tides. Waves, a personal favorite. This was on the cover of this month's Surfer magazine. I've never seen a picture like that, where you can see 100 different waves coming to shore down in Ventura. It's pretty remarkable. That's Ventura. Yeah, this is Surfers Point, C Street, and the pier, or what's left of the pier. It just reopened? Oh, cool. So I could talk about waves for weeks, so we'll do it really quick. Waves, the waves we're talking about, surface gravity waves, are caused by wind blowing over a certain distance. That distance is called a fetch. The harder it blows, over the longer the distance, the bigger the waves. That's in the middle of the ocean, and then as it moves out of the fetch, so it starts with little ripples, gets bigger and bigger, more feedback, the bigger the wave, the more wind can push it. Then it gets outside, and then it starts to change from messy wind chop into swell as it propagates outside of the storm generating place. Lots of math, but it's basically wave height, wave period, which is the time between successive waves, and velocities. The interesting thing is it's not always the biggest wave that causes the damage, it's the longest period wave. The longer the wave period, the faster that wave is moving. A 20-second period wave, about 75 miles an hour in the open ocean. A 17-second, only 3 seconds difference in the wave period, is about 55 miles an hour. Any surfers out there? Okay. When you try and paddle for a 20-second wave, it's a lot harder than a 17 or 13-second wave to catch. That's why. Enough math. Okay, waves break. So waves, as they move through, are actually not one wave moving. It's water molecules moving in circles called orbitals. As those energy moves through the orbitals, in the deep water, they're just moving. The same water molecule just moves back to the same place. Okay? So it's transmitting the energy. As it gets closer to shore, those orbitals, they're stacked up based on how big the wave height is. When it starts to encounter the bottom, those orbits compress and the wave starts to stand up. As you get closer, until basically the wave moves faster than the orbits can move, it breaks. When it breaks on the beach, it changes, and based on what the slope of that beach is. The steeper the beach, the higher the wave run up. If you have a really gradually sloping beach, you tend to get really mushy kind of waves. If you have a really abrupt change, you get a really big barreling or plunging wave. The energy expended when that wave breaks really determines how much sand is moved along the beaches and how quickly the erosion damages can occur. So bringing it here into the channel, Santa Barbara has a fascinating surf problem, because on its day it can be as beautiful as that picture in C Street with some of the best surf waves on the planet. And then there's about 9 months where the waves look like this on a big day, where it's this big. And that's because we have the Channel Islands to the south, which block all of these south swells from getting the channel. So blue colors are smaller waves, warmer colors are bigger waves here. This is sort of a normal kind of condition. Waves are pretty north, 300 and above. And Point Conception blocks a lot of the wave energy. And so it's really in a narrow swell window between about 230 and about 290, 95 degrees that the waves actually come in the channel and create some of the more damaging storm events. One of the pieces about an El Nino is that this is sort of the normal pattern of waves. During an El Nino, you get that elevation in tides. You also get a shift in the wave direction to the southwest. So you tend to get a lot more waves in the winter in the channel. And I know this year was a really good wave surf season down here. So waves, as they come into the coast, if they don't come perfectly parallel to the coast but at any kind of an angle, then that basically creates a longshore transport. Okay? So in this case, the waves are pushing sand along the beach from west to east. And that drives so one grain of sand, when it's pulled off the beach, doesn't come back in the same place, it moves down the coast. So a lot of what we do to look at storm impacts are using what's called a total water level elevation. So we have the measured tide series, and then we have that wave run-up, which is determined by wave height and period and beach slope. And if you add those together, you can get some astonishing results. I mean, some of these cliffs here, that one's probably 120 feet of wave run-up straight in the air, smashing into a cliff. So I want to change this now to think about what happens when so we've been talking about sort of current sea level with tides and storms, and then really as we add sea level itself is not going to cause a tremendous amount of problems. It's going to be the storms that arrive on top of elevated sea levels. Any climate skeptics here? How come nobody bites on that one? I am, no. So I like to make the distinction between climate cycles and human-induced climate changes. And climate cycles, basically there was a Serbian geophysicist in the 1920s who proposed this idea, and then it was verified in science in a bunch of subsequent research in the 70s. But this Milankovitch cycle basically looks at the shape of the orbit of the Earth around the sun, the tilt of the axis as it rotates, and the precession, which is the wobble of the Earth on its axis. So what does that mean? So you have a top. You spin that top. And it sort of does these big loops, okay? It doesn't stay in one place typically, unless you're really good at spinning a top. That's the eccentricity. That changes about every 120,000 years. The tilt, as the top starts to lose some speed, it kind of wobbles a little bit. That tilt is the obliquity, and then that wobble is the precession. And there's a time period of about 120, 42,000, and 26,000, 20 to 26,000 years. When those overlap, we get ice ages. When they are apart, we get warm periods. And so you can trace the historic ice ages in the geologic record to these Milankovitch cycles and the periodicity of those. Right now, we should be going into an ice age. And in the 70s, people were screaming, we're going into the next ice age. That's because that's what this math said. We can no longer account for what we're seeing in the climate without calculating or factoring in greenhouse gas emissions. So we have entered the Anthropocene, a new geologic era. So I have a lot of background in coastal geology. Yes?
So does that actually buy us more time then in terms of greenhouse gas we're supposed to be pulling than we are?
We're kind of not sure how runaway it's going to be. It could be moderating some of that, but we're not going to see, I mean, I think we're talking about stuff we've never seen in the geologic past. So this is the last, say, 350,000 years of global sea levels. These are basically ice ages, when the water in the oceans is in the ice caps. Ocean levels can be 400 feet or so lower and out on the continental shelf. The continental shelf offshore is the old shoreline, basically. During the rapid ice melts, we can see, I like to point out here, so time is on the left here at 0, going backwards to the right. Whoops. Hello? So here we are built at 0. 0 mean sea level. Mean. Average. Average of what? Average of 19 years of tides. Mean sea level, as sea level rises, is going to increase. Private property, public property boundaries are going to move as sea level rises. And we update that tidal epoch, it's called, every roughly 19 years. We have seen 40 feet higher sea levels in the geologic past. And we've seen some slow falls, some really rapid melts in the geologic past. We're going to look now at this end of the, yes?
When's the next update to the tidal?
Good question. The last one was 83 to 2001, so I think we have probably about another 3 to 5 years to get the measurements, and then they'll...
Who does it?
National Geodetic Survey and National Ocean Service. So I guess one point is 0, when somebody's like, oh, my house is at 10 feet. 10 feet what? So we're gonna, oh, that got a little weird one. But so this is the last roughly, so here's kind of when the Ice Age ended, about 20,000 years ago. Sea level started to rise. We've got, you can take the slope of that line to get an estimate of the sense, how fast it's rising, and it's about 4.5 inches a year. That's faster than we're observing today. There's been very rapid rises at 7.8 inches per year. And as we've sort of topped out here, all right, this is really, okay. But about 8,000 years ago, we started this really plateau in the sea level rise. So we've seen less than the trend has been today is about 1.2 inches of sea level rise a year. But the projections are for much higher rates of sea level rise. And the projections, so if all of the ice melts on Earth, and we've seen that in the geologic past, we could see another 265 feet of ice, sea level rise. So if anybody comes in for a permit and they live for above 265 feet, you can tell them they're safe from sea level rise. And it comes from sort of the mountain glaciers. Greenland has about 22 feet. Antarctica has about 200 feet. And then
As high as it will ever go.
that's as much ice that melts, and then that ocean water warms. So, and then we kind of run into this problem. How do we turn it off? So there's kind of two factors to sea level rise. The first, as I mentioned, is what we saw this past winter with warmer ocean waters occupying more volume. It's called thermal expansion. So basically, the warmer the ocean, the more volume it occupies. The second factor is the ice melt. And then it's the ice melt, which I talked about. But that's a global sea level rise. We live here, or you guys live here, I love to visit, and on a very active coastline, tectonically active coastline. There's places in Summerland that are rising as fast as the Himalayas. So if you look at 3 millimeters a year rise versus global sea level and 18 millimeters rise in Summerland, there's places where some of that sea level over time is actually going to be falling. You go to Goleta Slough or some of the other estuaries along the city's waterfront, which are subsiding, sinking, that 3 millimeters could be 6 millimeters. So we're seeing a lot of differences because of the local geology here, that we're going to experience different areas that are subsiding are going to have much bigger impacts from sea level rise, and some of the cliffs are going to have less impacts from sea level rise. So the National Research Council did a report sort of summarizing the state of the science, released it in 2013. And this was the projections they had for Los Angeles. So by 2100, the estimates range from over 5 feet of sea level rise, almost 2 meters of sea level rise, 65.5 inches, down to 16.7 inches at the low end. This is as more science comes out, I believe less and less these low numbers. And there's likely to be some revision to state guidance coming. There's been some motion at various levels to take out the low and actually add the sort of 5 meter worst case scenario where we might see 15, 16 feet by 2100 to also consider. What this means, though, without getting hung up on what decimal point's the right answer, we're going to start seeing increased frequency and depth of coastal flooding and inundation. There's going to be more saltwater intrusion into the groundwater supplies and coastal aquifers. We're going to have accelerated coastal erosion rates. Depending upon how we manage our beaches, we may not have beaches anymore. There's more likely to be greater frequency of cliff failures, and we're going to start seeing those impacts of armoring or keeping beaches in terms of recreation, access, and other habitats impacts, and we're likely to see a lot more costly damages over time. So I kind of talked about the coastal processes stuff. There's a lot of components. Are there any questions before I shift gears a little bit? Okay.
Why was the sea level for 8,000 years why steady with that?
The ocean has a lot of capacity to emissions as the Atlantic has opened. So, yes.
What happened to El Nino? Where's my water?
El Nino happened. Ask the Gavio to pier. Not all El Ninos are created equally. We could go into that for a long time. Basically, I think what happened was the warm ocean blob that everybody's talked about has been farther offshore than in past major El Ninos. And so that shifted the jet stream track, and the storms came farther to the north than they usually do. There's a lot of other things, but that's the thumbnail version, or my take on it. So this actually impacts the coast. So, dunes, the coast is kind of dunes and cliffs and inlets. We basically get a storm water level, and that causes overtopping and flooding. And I'm sorry I had some issues with the presentation, so I pulled some Oregon examples. It happens there too. And then you also, as those storm waters and the wave run-up comes up, you also start to catalyze dune erosion or soft cliff erosion. Then you get into sort of cliff back shorelines where a lot of erosion occurs as the waves eat away at the base of the cliff. And I should say cliff erosion happens kind of by two processes. One is marine processes, coastal processes, waves. The other one is more terrestrial or precipitation. Elevated groundwaters can cause a lot of sliding and slippage. You can get animals burrowing in it. You can get the kids climbing down, trying to run off the cliff in Isla Vista. There's all kinds of things that can cause terrestrial processes causing. One of the ways you can tell whether a cliff is being dominated by coastal processes is it looks like this. It's pretty much vertical. The ones that are terrestrial dominated have started to lay back, and they have more of some vegetation, but you can kind of see that they're starting to fall back at an angle. So the steeper the cliff, the more likely it's being dominated by marine processes. But you also have to go that there's a lot of failure mechanisms in all of these cliffs, and that's inherent based on the type of geology. Monterey Shale is most of the geology around here, but the angle in which that Monterey Shale, which is a marine deposited kind of bottom of the ocean basin formation that's been consolidated and uplifted, but the tilt on those determines a lot of the failure widths in Santa Barbara. Some cliffs, you'll get a cliff, like a little rock cut underneath, and then it kind of just rock topples or sloughs off. That's one of the failure mechanisms. And those hazard zones, if you were to sort of look at setbacks and things like that, that would, because of the way that cliff fails, you don't need as large of a setback. You get deep-seated landslides. We've got some great examples in Santa Barbara of these, and we'll see some of those this afternoon. And then there's some that are, okay, that one didn't work so well, that are also, that I've seen in places, not as frequently here, but the one that I think is probably closest is the landslide at Point Sal. If anybody's seen that, where it's literally like big, huge blocks moving down. You can almost step up. So that's a little bit on the processes. We'll come back to some more on that later. So I wanted to shift now to a little bit on the beaches. There's a lot of ways we describe the beaches. I think, everybody's kind of heard of intertidal, subtidal, under the water. But really, this backshore zone on the far left, basically anywhere waves are interacting are the nearshore zone. That's kind of the wave-dominated zone. You get into the backshore where waves will interact a little bit. But what happens on that backshore, besides the habitats and recreation and access, with management activities really can determine how that coast evolves behind it. Beaches change seasonally. This is sort of a very classic one, but during high energy wave times, you tend to get sand taken off this berm and berm crest and pulled offshore into offshore sandbars. And This is one mechanism that beaches have, natural defense mechanisms that beaches have. When there's a sandbar out here, the waves that come out break out here instead of slamming onto the coast. And so that wave energy is broken up and dissipates as it goes into the coast.
Does that berm, though, Jim, in our case, get moved eastward? I mean, that berm material doesn't actually deposit a sand?
Right. Well, it does indeed deposit sandbars during large events. It'll pull the sandbars off.
Offshore.
But when it comes back on shore during a calmer time period, that sand will push back on shore, but it goes down the coast. So and that's kind of the converse. So we get a storm profile and versus sort of a low energy or swell profile. We also get a lot of episodic sediment inputs. Sand gets to the beach in this littoral cell or sand shed basically by fluvial discharge. So we get creeks and watersheds, fire events, big flows, push a lot of sediment out, and then it kind of goes dry. And that's if we clean out the debris basins or take them out. We can get massive landslides. Cliff erosion can also contribute some. That's pretty much on the sand size. There's been a lot less work done on the contributions from cliff erosion. There's been some initial work, but what hasn't been factored is cobbles. Cobbles typically are eroding or moving through the watersheds or eroding out of the cliffs, and they function differently than sandy beaches. Sand kind of moves onshore and offshore with waves. Cobbles, when they're exposed, behave differently. The bigger the wave energy, the higher the cobbles stack themselves. It's sort of like if the cobbles were like a pool rack and you break the rack and they kind of go everywhere. But what happens with the wave energy is it puts the rocks higher and higher, and that forms a natural barrier. What I've seen over the work I've done down here is that in most cases we've lost our cobbles at the base of all these beaches. And so these beaches are much more likely to disappear really quick and not have that secondary cobble berm, which reduces the wave energy at the toes of these cliffs.
And the reason we lost the cobble is transport down?
Watershed alterations. Carpinteria lost it, I think, because they would storm berm it all up, and that would prematurely expose the cobbles. And so you would lose a larger volume of material every winter than was scraped up. So management activities, just like climate change right now, it's our fault. But at the mouth of every one of these creeks, there should be a pile of cobbles. And if you go up to like Bell Canyon or some of the North Coast Gaviota creeks, you can find almost cobble dunes, cobble berms that are still pretty intact. So this is what we know about sand to the Santa Barbara littoral cell. This is some work done by some of my predecessors working with Gary Griggs. There used to be annually about 3.6 million cubic yards of material coming into the system because of all the dams on the San Ynez River. I should say that we assume it goes from the Santa Maria River mouth down to Magoo Submarine Canyon. And so what we've seen though is that largely because of dam construction, we've lost about 40% of our sediment supply to the beaches. We know this because the Santa Barbara Harbor and Ventura and Channel Islands have been dredging for a number of years. Santa Barbara averages about 300,000 cubic yards annually.
That since like the 1920s, or when were the dams?
The dams started in the 20s, yes. So this is kind of my little cartoon of how it works, the beaches work down here. So we have the main creeks, main river inputs, as well as the smaller creeks on the south coast. We've got that narrow swell window that sets up sediment transport on the Pacific side, north of Point Conception. You can get seasonal reversals, north and south sand transport. Inside the channel, we get west to east. So the sand's pretty much on a freight train to go down to the Magoo Submarine Canyon. We know that We've got the harbor dredge records here that sort of tell us how much sand's moving along the system. And then ultimately we see it go off at Wainimi and Magoo, submarine canyons. What's going on here? So basically we see that 40% reduction, which that sort of formed the basis for my dissertation work, honestly. It was to look at if we were losing all the sand in the system, we should see all the beaches narrowing. We don't see that. So, and that's kind of what this says in a long way. But what we don't say is that there isn't this overall narrowing. So when permit applications come in and go, oh, average annual erosion rate at my house is 3 inches per year, that doesn't mean that the existing hazard zone is 3 inches. These cliffs or dunes can erode substantially and then not do anything for a while. And so we really need to get a handle on what's the extent of failures potential before in sort of establishing setbacks. And I have a major issue with the setback policies around the state, around the country really, because it's based on this average annual that doesn't account for how the processes work. Goleta Beach is a place near and dear to my heart. I had a whole chapter on Goleta Beach that got ignored, as the science does in policy work sometimes. But you know, this is the shoreline in 1938 and the shoreline in 2003. Not a whole lot of change. In the interim times, though, if you look at it, the beach has been 150 meters wider, 400 feet wider during the late 70s. And there was times, not in just a few years ago, where in particular this area in here, kind of under UCSB, was as wide as I've ever seen it in the historic record. So I've seen, there's another climate phase I haven't talked about called the Pacific Decadal Oscillation, which is basically a 25 to 30 year El Nino-like cycle, but it affects the storm track. And if you think about how sensitive the beaches of Santa Barbara are to wave direction, during one phase it's farther to the north, so we get more steep north swells, we don't get as many waves. When it shifts down into the positive phase of the, or negative phase of the PDO, where the swells, storm tracks farther south, we get a lot less wave energy, or excuse me, a lot more wave energy, creating narrower beaches. So we sort of see a climate cycle involvement in these oscillations. And so then I started to think about, well, how does this system actually work? And your question was a good one. You know, when it goes to offshore bar, doesn't it just go along shore? And the answer is it does both. And doing some volume calculations, I basically tracked the erosion that happened both in following the 82-83 El Nino and 97-98 El Nino, and soon to probably be coming this time. But following the 97-98 El Nino, massive erosion started at Sands, and then that it took a long time for that beach to recover. So while that beach was widening again, no sand was passing around and moving down coast. So we set up an erosion wave of sand for several years. Goleta didn't start to erode until almost 1999, so a year and a half after the major El Nino event. And then it went really quickly. And we didn't start getting sand back at Goleta Beach until 2005, really. And that erosion wave kind of continued down the coast. What's next here? Okay. And in 2007, you had the cliff failure at Shoreline Park. And that was about the same time that Carl Treiberg called me and said, Dave, there's no sand at Ledbetter. We have this storm berm we build every year to protect the yacht club and the boat parking. We don't have any sand to do it. We're thinking about reversing the dredge and pumping sand up. So what's going on? I said, well, the erosion wave is now arriving at the harbor and there's no sand in there. So some of the sand management activities need to be done at a sort of in that regional context to perhaps fill those erosion wave holes and prevent that big gap. So there's ways to use this knowledge to change the sand system or sand management to reduce the likelihood of catastrophic erosion.
What happened at that point? Did they reverse the dredge? What was
No, they kind of squeaked through a pretty lackluster storm year. So this is kind of the conceptual model. Is every one of these are sort of the main beaches in this littoral cell from or basically from Sands to Ventura Harbor. And basically, if you think about each of these main beaches that are listed here, they all are for sort of their own sandbox. And so once the sandbox gets to a certain level, it's like a leaky barrel, it sort of spills into the next one. But as long as it stays below these thresholds, it's going to trap all the sand and create erosion waves. So again, thinking about how we manage the system in terms of these thresholds is something that we can really think about in terms of adaptation strategies. Okay, you guys all look tired, lots of sleepy, dopey eyes. I'm sorry I'm after lunch. So here's some pictures that you probably haven't seen of your city. These are kind of fun ones. So this is pre-harbor construction. These are some of the storm damages. 1914, that one is 1904 or 1905, I think. And you can see that these damages have been occurring for a long time. This is not Stearns Wharf here. This is actually the pier that was off of Point Castillo, which is right where the Castillo exits right where the baseball City College is. They basically bulldozed the point to build the material for the breakwater. So in 1927, this is kind of the shoreline here. You can see that old pier. They started construction of the breakwater, which is here. And you can see it started to immediately impound sand at Ledbetter. And that's one of the reasons why Ledbetter is so wide, because it's backed up by the harbor. And once it filled up, then it started to, you can see here the sand hasn't quite filled up to be spilling around and creating the need for the dredging. But what happened during that time period is all the beaches to the south, or east in this case, started to erode. So everybody started to build these growing structures to trap sand and build some beaches. That erosion wave hit Carpinteria and Sandy Land, now probably revetment land, is a more apt description. Sandy Land used to have 300, 400 feet of dunes, and there used to be a sand tombolo that went out to Carp Reef. That sand, the erosion wave, hit Carpinteria the same time that a Chubasco, a Mexican hurricane, made landfall in Long Beach and sent waves, big waves, the wrong way up the channel, and it breached that tombolo and changed the sediment transport dynamics. And now it's a marine protected area for rocky intertidal habitat. So we've done some good work here to change the functioning of these beaches in here. I love this picture. You can really see how, Santa Barbara had already been pretty built out, not completely, but the way it's been managed, it's really been a hodgepodge. We'll go see this. This is the rebuilt of one of the original growings, and I would say it's not completely effective anymore. In the 1930s and 40s as well, all of the low-lying ice plant dunes in front of a bike path between there and the ocean, they built a timber pile seawall. You can see that kind of in these pictures here. And there's some pictures of them actually constructing it from the 1940s. And that's still there. This was exposed to, 2014 during a big storm event, and they stopped dredging for a cycle. there was a contract issue with somebody in the city. And the Corps didn't come and do dredging, or the Corps, I don't know, there was a missed dredge cycle. And so there was a low part, and this whole wall was exposed. And to most of us, this was news. Like, we didn't know it was down there.
What stretch of East Beach is that?
That is, well, it goes the whole way.
It's along the bike
Yeah.
path.
Okay,
The
so
Beachway
the
bike
whole,
path.
the whole beachway.
Between the bike path, there's the kind of doomy
Nice
ice
plan.
plant covered.
Yeah,
Right in there.
yeah, the whole length. I have some
We
old
have some
maps
out
in here
front
too.
I believe, too, out in front of this building, isn't there?
Yeah, there's a little curb wall right now that's not part of this structure. 82, 83, El Nino was the storm of record, the largest storm, largest amount of damages that has been documented in recent years. And we lost a bunch of Stearns Wharf and waves and kelp back into Cabrillo Boulevard. This is that erosion wave I mentioned, and the cliff failure at Shoreline Park in 2007 or 8. I think it was late 7. We've got the Andrea Clark Bird Refuge. There's a weir here that basically stops the tides from getting into here. Could be an amazing restoration project at some point in the future, I hope. Just an idea. We have the Laguna Channel Tide Gate, which was built in the late 30s. During that kind of low sand time, there's a lot more tidal inundation back up the Laguna Creek and Mission Creek in particular. But this tide gate was constructed to try and reduce the amount of tidal inundation getting into the city. Upgraded in the 1960s, and it needs some love. So, you guys are all familiar with the LCP update, I'm sure. At least aware that it's going on. This is kind of what's been driving it. This sea level rise policy guidance, which was passed unanimously by the Coastal Commission in 2015, after about 3 years of responding to 6,000 comments or something like that. And this sort of miracle wheel here is sort of the gist of what is supposed to happen as you look to update the LCP. So we look at what's the sort of sea level rise projections, what's the scenarios, what are the impacts in the jurisdiction, so what's the hazard extent, what's in those hazards, how can we adapt those vulnerable assets and infrastructure and resources, and then can we develop or update the LCP to sort of address these in a policy context, and then sort of monitor and revise as needed. So to that extent, the county of Santa Barbara was very successful at getting a grant from the Coastal Conservancy to do some modeling of projecting future coastal hazards. And so we looked at a lot of different scenarios. This figure over here shows the different uplift rates along the cliffs that I talked about previously, so we could account for those really regional differences in this area at a, like the Isla Vista Peninsula sort of level. We did sort of the high, medium, low scenario, 2030, 2060, 2100, and looked at a variety of different wave climates. And so we generated maps for 2010, which was existing conditions under the topography, LiDAR data we had, then projections for 2030, 2060, and 2100. There are a lot of hazard identification data sets out there now. There's new ones coming from FEMA and from USGS. So over time, the information there's going to be a lot more information. It's going to be interesting to see how similar they are. A lot of this work's just hitting to ground, and so an evaluation of how frequently things overlap, I think is necessary. But the modeling that I did with ESA looked at sort of sea level rise scenarios, took the waves from out in the ocean and transformed them along the coast, because the waves at Halama are much different size and shape than, say, Goleta Beach or the city waterfront, and basically calculated total water levels. And then we intersected that total water level, tides and wave run up, with the backshore. What's the geology? Is it a cliff? Is it a dune? How steep is the beach slope? How high is the cliff? Is it armored? Is it not? What's the historic trends of erosion and sediment supply? And made calculations basically every 500 meters along shore, and generated a series of model outputs. So we have coastal erosion hazards, coastal flooding hazards, wave velocity, or a V zone if people are familiar with the FEMA maps. What areas are going to be inundated every month? And then, because there's so much uncertainty, we put together a spatial aggregation or relative risk layer. We overlapped all the hazard zones with all the different iterations, and now there is one data set you can look at, and it says this area is going to be hazardous in all of the sea level rise scenarios, this one only in one. And so you could potentially tie planning and permitting stuff to how frequently some of these hazards overlap. So a good analogy would be 80% chance of rain during an El Nino year. 8 out of 10 weather models say it might rain during the El Nino, and 20% was right. But all models are wrong. Some of them are useful. A model should be used to test what we already know about a system and use it to further our understanding by providing opportunities to tweak it. And that's what was done with this. We really did, I think, a really nice job at trying to incorporate a lot of different information. And this is all readily available here. I have the website where you can get to it. And if you live near the coast and are curious, you can go in and zoom in on your house and see what might affect you. So then the next step in this process here is the vulnerability assessment. The city's had two, a Bren and a UC Santa Cruz grad student. City of Goleta just finished one last December. County just finished one last month, and we're working on the North Coast. So there's a lot of these information around, but really it looks at the impacts of various infrastructure and resources to types of hazards. Because if we're going to adapt to coastal erosion, the strategies are very different than tidal inundation. So we kind of need to know what's causing the hazard to be able to adapt to it. And then identifies what's impacted at what elevation of sea level rise or what time in the future. I like to think about it like this. This will probably be my last squiggly line science graph. But we have mean sea level on the y-axis, time on the x-axis. And this is data from the San Francisco gauge, but I think it's it's informative. These are the highest water levels recorded at each year. We distill that down with all the tides. That's the sea level rise trend. That's where we get our 7.5 inches per year, or 7.5 inches per century. Then we can sort of choose our own adventure in the sea level rise scenario. We don't get to vote on this, though. Do not ever ask people to vote on what sea level rise they want to see. I've seen it happen in planning exercises, and it doesn't help. It's job security for me because I have to come try and explain it all over again. But so we can calculate from these extreme water levels recurrence intervals. Okay, there's a monthly recurrence up to a 50-year return period. And so if we look at this through time, let's pick an elevation here. This is the 65 inches, just over basically the high projection. So in 1950, a water level that was a 50-year storm event with 5 feet of sea level rise by 2077 happens once a month. So let's take that a step further. What does that mean? This is from some economic analysis done for the city of Goleta based on cleanup costs. So during a moderate storm, they'd have $500,000 of cleanup costs. During a major storm, $4.5 million of cleanup costs. So if we take that, if we pay for that annually for a 50-year cleanup, we're only going to, and we have to do it once in that 50 years, we're going to spend $10,000 to $90,000 a year. Fit in just about any jurisdiction, no matter how poor you are, budget. But then, oops. But then, you know, so this is all shifted, but, you know, 1 year, when we start spending $500,000 to $4.5 million every year, we might start going, maybe we should do something differently. If this is a monthly recurrence and we're spending between $6 million and $54 million, I know Santa Barbara land prices and property values are high, but we could buy a lot of the problem places and turn them back into public open spaces or do other, we're going to invest that into other adaptation strategies. When this occurs in time is something that I hope the LCP can start to shed some light on eventually. Just an idea. This is where this is the website I was looking for earlier, and a snapshot. You can go and look at it. It's got a special Santa Barbara button, so you can go in and click on Santa Barbara, and you have to click on this flood and sea level rise data, but you can download the data if you're good with GIS. You can read all the gory technical details if you want. You can also just type in an address for your permit application, and it'll zoom right to it. So it can be hopefully a usable tool. And that one overlapping spatial aggregate relative risk data set is in here, and you can look to see how many scenarios or how many times that location is hit with the amounts of scenarios and elevations of sea level rise. So in some of the work, I think it was somebody I was working with in the city, whether it was Carl or maybe Jill Zachary or, I don't know, Jessica, you might have dug these up, but these are the 1937 hydrographic survey of the waterfront. And sure enough, there's our little concrete wall with the wooden bulkheads and all of this that we've seen. So that data is available, and if it's lost, I now have it, so I can give it back. Armoring has a lot of long-term impacts. 2 of the impacts are called placement loss, and you can see this example from Carpinteria. You know, this is a revetment that was built at 20 feet high, 2-to-1 slope, takes up 40 feet of dry sand beach. The passive erosion, a seawall, maybe takes 5 to 10 feet of a footprint. So you sort of keep a little bit more sandy beach. Passive erosion is what happens when you fix the line. Erosion continues to happen, but you've stopped it in one place, here or here, and you've allowed it to occur adjacent. You get that additional erosion. And so the passive erosion is this narrowing of the beach by stopping this from eroding. And you can see here we have a marine-dominated cliff, pretty vertical, and here with the tree in the front, invasive tree, you can see it's a terrestrial mass wasting dominated system. You can take up a lot of beach with revetments. So the mapping was done for the county, which includes all the South Coast. The first round of modeling did not include consideration of coastal armory. So we assumed that at some point in the future, the structures would fail and erosion would catch up to where it would be naturally, and we didn't want to show a place that is already hazardous to not be hazardous because somebody put a seawall. And so in some cases, the hazard zones look really bad. And the city was one of those locations. And So we have since gone back and are modeling with existing structures in place and maintained for the next 100 years. So we have revised hazard zones, and they are not on this website yet. I don't know if the city wants that to happen. We could do that. The city has them. All the black is the existing armory, okay? You know, everybody looks here and doesn't realize that this is all armored right now. But this is the, hold on a second, let me squint here. This is the high sea level rise, and this is coastal erosion. So even though the structures will be in place, there's still, if you flash back to that buried revetment, the crest isn't very tall. And so waves will get over that at some point and erode the top part. So we've adjusted the erosion model to calculate what erosion would still occur above the structure. And that's what these revised hazard zones show. Still some very substantive damages potentially. This is tidal flooding. Again, this is all the high sea level rise. We've done low and medium and a lot of renditions, but basically the lighter colors indicate what's we know to be hydraulically connected. The darker colors are if the Laguna tide gate fails, or if the weir to the bird refuge fails, what else could get wet? And you can see that based on these revised models, that by 2100 with 5 feet of sea level rise, unless something's done with the Laguna tide gate, then we're going to see some substantial flooding potentially.
Excuse me, on this, is that, you know how you said it, 1 month to like 2 months, whatever it was, 6 months, is that?
So this, the tidal flooding, let's see, this is a 1 month recurrence. This is what could get wet every month with 5 feet of sea level rise and a failed tide gate. But 5 feet of sea level rise with an extreme monthly high tide overtops the crest of the structure. So the structure needs to be redone if it's going to persist. And then this is sort of the wave runup, what areas are going to have velocity associated with them that can damage buildings and structures. Am I going the wrong way? No. Okay. Almost done here. That's kind of bleak, so I don't want you to think that there's nothing we can do. There's a lot that can be done. You think about increasing risk and sea level rise or time. We're going to start seeing more disasters and higher costs over time. Part of my hope for all these LCP updates is that the community sets its acceptable tolerance of what these damages and risks and cleanup costs are that before we trigger something else. And we're going to be on this red line, moving along. Uh-oh, it's starting to get uncomfortable. We're going to make a decision, and we're going to kind of reduce our risk and weave our way into the future, making decisions that will lower our vulnerabilities and risks. And they kind of fall into 3 categories. 4 if you count do nothing as a good strategy. But retreat, accommodate, and protect. And there's various forms of that that kind of fall in a green, more mimicking the natural processes. You know, dune restoration, habitat enhancements, versus more of a gray, which is much more build a seawall, hold the line kind of strategy. And you know, you can sort of look at manage realignment of infrastructure over time, elevating some structures to reduce the impacts. We can armor and protect resources in place for a certain amount of time. Inlet management's obviously a critical component in here, as Goleta Slough is a good example of. Sediment management can be used to reduce a lot of the hazards. And you know, Santa Barbara has the unique opportunity in that you do have a dredge that has a lot of sand coming down the system. And where that sand's placed, how it's maintained, how that sediment's utilized in the system is a huge opportunity that most jurisdictions don't have. So you guys have a whole nother set of tools to work with in the adaptation front. There's also a ton of policy options. This is the fun part, and this is, there's a lot of different viewpoints on adaptation. As soon as you see these hazard zones, everybody's first thing is, well, what if we build a seawall? What if we nourish the beach? Well, how much are they going to cost? And your beachfront homeowners, your hotels are asking, what's my house, what's my hotel going to be worth in 30 years? And your tourists in your community who can't afford to live on the ocean front are asking, what's my beach going to look like in 30 years? And you get a lot of headbutting in this, and it comes down to sort of, public versus private perspectives. A sector, say water supply or wastewater, becomes, we have to do this. We have to save Cabrillo Boulevard. The art can't go anywhere else but Cabrillo Boulevard on the grass. You get these kind of like myopic, focused pieces that we need to think about a broader perspective to adaptation. Depending upon the quality of the vulnerability assessment, you get useful information that informs what adaptation strategies may be needed or you don't. So that is an aspect. I almost think it's harder to do the modeling of human behavior and management decisions than it is to model sea level rise and coastal hazards. There's a lot of loopholes in the Coastal Act that permit armoring for existing development, and existing development is undefined largely. There's not always a comprehensive strategy. The city has a very big dial with the dredge to manage the waterfront to the east and potentially some to the west, but that's unique. I think that working with the other jurisdictions, if you do something drastic here, everybody, the rest of the county and cities down coast, all the way down to Ventura, are going to feel the hurt. So there has to be a regional perspective on adaptation. A lot of those decisions are going to need to be informed by the economic trade-offs. And I think this point's important in that we need to think about maladaptation. And that is, we don't want to do something that's going to set us on a course that, as new information comes to light in the next 10, 50, 100 years, we're not so committed to a course of action that we're basically looking up at walls, living New Orleans-like behind huge levees with giant pumps, that if the electricity goes out and a levee gets over top, we're flooded and ruined. So we want to make sure that we leave the flexibility and the resilience in the community adaptation plan, so we're not backed into a corner. We're with nowhere to go except buy scuba gear. Have to work with everybody. And I want to sort of, I'm getting close here, but there's these kind of three categories: protect, accommodate, and retreat. And we're here. We've got flood control, some existing armoring. We may be able to accommodate a foot and a half of sea level. So up here is time or elevation of sea level rise. And we're going to make a decision as we get close to that risk and say, okay, we need to start doing some planning because we're going to exceed this 1 foot pretty soon. So we need to start getting some plans in place that can, either enhance habitats, do some inlet management, retrofit infrastructure, buy us some time to accommodate 2 or 3 feet of sea level rise. And then it's going to get harder and harder to protect in place, and we're going to have to start looking at elevating structures and, or improving the sediment management, or just buying and moving or retreating, realigning transportation corridors. That can accommodate a lot more. And ultimately, with 265 feet of sea level rise, the only rational strategy is retreat. That's not going to happen overnight. We have time to do it. But identifying tipping points when we're like, oh, we just hit 2 feet, and now we really need to get something in plan for when that's going to go higher. And so identifying some of the triggering mechanisms, what that triggers, when that measurable trigger is exceeded or threshold is exceeded, what happens, what kind of planning goes on. I think that's a piece that really we need to think about in implementation. And that can be a variety of different mechanisms. Capital improvement plans, the easiest one. That's kind of what everybody's familiar with in the public works sector. Local hazard mitigation plans, great way to get your, these large high-cost projects paid for by FEMA or largely cost shared with FEMA. Park master plans, shoreline management plans, all of those kinds of things are mechanisms to potentially implement some of these policies, as well as sort of zoning ordinance kind of updates. This is all going to cost a lot of money, and here's some ideas on how to fundraise for that. Transient occupancy taxes could be increased. You could have a dedicated percentage of those that could be focused on adaptation. Large infrastructure that serves the entire community can be, small rate pay or increases, sales tax increases. Some neighborhoods, if they have a particularly bad problem, may want to form geologic hazard abatement districts to cost share different strategies. Again, I already mentioned mitigation projects. You can set up fee structure. So when somebody builds that revetment that takes up half of the beach, that's the public trust resource that we're supposed to be working to protect, they should be charged rent for that loss of beach. And they should be charged for the loss of sand coming out of the cliffs and the cobbles that are no longer getting to the coast. There's no longer the same recreational usability. There could be additional fees assigned for that. Some of these are happening with the Coastal Commission right now, or the State Lands Commission. That's all going into the state funds. You can generate those same kind of fee structure here in the city and start to have a pool of resources to develop adaptation, fund educational and outreach, so you don't have to just, go beg city council all the time for the next piece of the pie. You can start to set up some self-growing funds. Somebody builds a wall, have them bond it to take it out when it's done. Green infrastructure bonds are also a new thing that's kind of been coming out more and more in the literature. So that's it.